Hello, everybody. Tonight, I was going to talk about Washington, D.C. It's a very important city internationally. You'll see here on the map, it's basically located right down here next to Baltimore, Philadelphia, New York, and even Boston. And then if you move this map, you're going to see Richmond actually is pretty close as well. So there's a number of cities that people don't usually typically talk about when they talk about Washington, D.C., but it actually is very close, super close to Baltimore, as we'll see. But I'm going to zoom out here. You can see where in the world Washington, D.C. is relative to everything else. So basically, it's along the East Coast here. You're going to see this whole little area here kind of separating Washington, D.C. with Philadelphia. This is Delaware. And then you're going to see basically off to the west is another kind of river, the Potomac River, heading up into Washington, D.C. So this whole bay is quite ginormous internationally. You can kind of see that each one of these inlets kind of lead to a different city. So actually the bigger one heads up to Baltimore and Philadelphia. And then you can see basically New York with this ginormous island, Long Island, and then also Boston in the distance here. But it's important to kind of get familiar with where Washington, D.C. is relative to everything else. I would say I've lived in New York and I traveled to Washington, D.C. a couple times. And each time has been very different and interesting. There's a lot to learn about Washington, D.C. I would say it's not nearly as large as New York, but it does have a lot of really interesting features that we're going to kind of get into. So basically, let's look at this map first. I'll zoom out a little bit so you can see essentially where we are located. Let's go back to that Delaware Bay, and you can see basically how this all works coming in from the Atlantic Ocean. So you basically have New York City up here, Long Island, and then you have Delaware, and then this whole bay here. And if you follow this bay in here, you'll basically get into this main area of Washington, D.C. So let's zoom in here and kind of look at where that is. And you can see a couple miles outside of Washington, D.C., it actually starts to get a lot more suburban. There's actually quite a lot of suburbia outside of Washington, D.C., and actually even in the downtown, there's not a whole lot of really tall buildings here, but we're going to kind of see the main area. So basically, this river here separates Alexandria, so the Pentagon is actually on a different side here. There's basically over here in Arlington, and then there's a different state here, so you have basically Maryland kind of surrounding Washington, D.C. here, and then the Potomac River, and then you head all the way up to the Trump Golf Course heading out here, and basically the airport here, and then there's another airport, the Washington Dulles Airport, which is actually outside a little ways. So but the main part you want to kind of be familiar with is kind of this area right in downtown. I'm going to zoom in here so you can see. So basically, if you're to acquaint yourself, basically you have the White House right here, the United States Capitol building right here, and then there's kind of a major park that comes right down the center. There's been a lot of protests over the years, meetings, and people, a lot of free museums also around here. You'll see the Smithsonian is pretty big, but basically the White House and the United States Capitol being huge, as well as the Lincoln Memorial, and then you'll have kind of this island here, the Thomas Jefferson Memorial, and then there's kind of a wharf here, and then over on this side is the Navy Yards, and it kind of becomes a little bit more military oriented as you head outside of D.C. You have the Coast Guard, U.S. Department of Defense, the Pentagon, and so on, and then it's more residential as you get towards the north side of the town, and it actually goes quite far out. You can kind of see on each one of these roads, but the main part you want to be familiar with is basically this part here. You can see I'm going to kind of zoom in and zoom out and move around here a little bit, but let's look at the Capitol really quick. So you can see how this all works. Now, basically, they have the United States Senate and House, and then there are these buildings around here are basically for those sides. So you see the Senate building over here, and then the House of Representatives building over here, and then each one of these sides where they vote here, and then there's kind of the main Capitol building. This has been built over many years, so there's basically quite a lot of buildings. What I would do is go in and just look at each one of these buildings. You can see it's kind of different. On the south side, there's not as much residential. It basically heads right into the Navy Yards as you get on the south side here. And then the north side, you can see some of the Federal Triangle and some other areas, including the White House. So what I would definitely do is zoom in, and you can learn quite a bit about each one of these buildings along near the White House. And I definitely highly recommend kind of zooming in and kind of searching around what's going on the major streets. What we're going to kind of do is kind of look at some of the major neighborhoods. So we're not really going to cover a lot of the like memorials. You can look at that on a map and study that yourself. What we're going to kind of do is look at some of the hidden neighborhoods and some of the surprises that you might not expect about Washington, D.C. And basically, here's the overall population map of D.C. You can see Baltimore is actually connected, very connected to Washington, D.C., and you can almost see there's a continuous population between Baltimore and Washington, D.C., as well as Virginia. You can see there's quite a lot of people out here in Alexandria, and actually even maybe as much as D.C. or even more than D.C. So that's an interesting point to look at. This is kind of a cool map to see because you can see some of the major streets. This is Pennsylvania Avenue here, heading between the White House and the Capitol. And there's many other side streets, so you can kind of see there's kind of a structure here of streets, and then some diagonal streets that kind of run in some interesting areas, making the town a little bit more interesting with having some of these diagonal streets. But you can see again this National Mall here, the Capitol grounds, the kind of the Ellipse, the White House grounds, and some other areas near the downtown. So you kind of can use this map to kind of see some of that. And this one is an interesting map just because it shows the population. Actually, there's quite a lot of population even outside of New York. So New York is quite heavily populated, but it actually goes all the way down to D.C. And you can see some of that on this map. You can kind of see how this works with Baltimore and Philadelphia, as well as how it kind of runs into the river, and there's actually quite a lot heading out into Virginia, and it actually looks pretty consistent. You can almost not even see the river here, but it does head out through there. So the Earth at Night map really shows some interesting characteristics for the United States. You can kind of see there's basically an eastern half of the United States, kind of almost nothing in the center, and then there's the kind of the west coast. So a lot of the population actually does kind of come from this Washington, D.C. area. You can see this heads all the way down to Atlanta, and actually Atlanta being quite huge, and then Chicago in the distance here, New York, Baltimore, and Philadelphia. And you can almost see no difference between Baltimore and Washington, D.C. on this map. But if we zoom in and we kind of turn it a little bit, you can start to see how this is all connected and kind of going through different areas along the coast, heading out definitely to Atlanta, and just kind of going through Charlotte, Greensboro, North Carolina, South Carolina, and so on. So, and actually kind of even bypassing the coast, which is pretty interesting. So that's kind of an interesting point to look at. So next we're going to kind of go into the major neighborhoods, and there's actually a couple key points that you kind of want to see on a map for yourself. So let's kind of position yourself here on this map so you can see where we are, and I want to look at basically the neighborhoods are primarily on the north side of the city that we're going to look at. It's kind of sad that there isn't more stuff going on right along the water here in the wharf and some other areas, but the residential areas that you should definitely know about are kind of along the north side. So there's these two circles, Logan Circle here, and then there's the DuPont Circle. So you can see that circle here. We're going to first kind of look at this DuPont Circle so you can kind of see what that looks like as we zoom in here. Let's see if we can get some street view out. So you can see quite a number of streets coming all in converging. So this makes for a kind of a fun experience in DC with having these little circular areas. Let's just load up one of these maps and see if we can get zoomed in right here to see what the street view looks like. So each of these blocks have quite a number of restaurants and different places. I definitely recommend going through the DC area and kind of seeing for your top restaurants. I had a fun time kind of checking out each one of these restaurants. Next, we're going to go to kind of the Logan Circle. So this is just next to the DuPont Circle. You can see P Street kind of connects here. And then we're going to kind of zoom in on this spot as well. Okay, so after you've kind of acquainted yourself with that street, you kind of needed to know where 7th Street is. 7th Street kind of runs right down through kind of halfway between the White House and the United States Capitol, and you can kind of see it in the map here. It actually goes quite far into the distance. It kind of heads all the way onto the south side, and then the north side here, and then kind of heads out. And you can see it's actually called 29 out in this region here, so kind of heads all the way that way. So let's just zoom in and look at what's going on at 7th Street. You can see this is the main district for the convention center, so you can see that here on the map, and then quite a number of other places. And let's see if we can get a street view image right there. Alright, so here you are on the 7th Street, and you can kind of see how important the street is already. There's quite a lot of bus systems running down here. You got 2 buses just in this one photo. And basically this is the convention center right there. And that's a pretty interesting photo to take a look at. Okay, next we're going to take a look at M Street here. So this is located near one of those main circles. You can see DuPont Circle. But the nice part about this street is it kind of heads quite a big ways. Now this is actually heading all the way out into Georgetown, so it kind of makes a break here and then heads into Georgetown. And then the White House, as you can see over here, and the National Mall, and then the rest of the Potomac River. So there's quite a number of restaurants and interesting areas. You can see all this has been blocked off right now because they're having the event for the inauguration. Next, let's look at H Street. So if you can kind of get yourself positioned, we're starting to head out into the, I guess, east side of the city. It's not really loading super well, but you can kind of see H Street kind of starts out here and then kind of comes through here, and then heads out further east. So the Capitol building is over this way, and you can see the river in the distance there. One of my favorite neighborhoods is kind of this neighborhood near Georgetown, and you can kind of see you have this whole little district kind of off to the side here. Anyway, thanks for watching. I hope you've thanks for watching. I hope you found some interesting areas. Take a look at all the street